Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here with another Master Duel video for you guys. Today we're going to be doing another metagame analysis, and it might seem a bit odd because normally I do these like about once per season, or at least normally. That's how I've been doing them so far anyway. But this season we've already, we're already on our second one. It's actually only been a week since our last metagame analysis video. That was when we took a look at the meta and how it had shaped up just a few days after the release of Ruler's Mask. However, we've had a fairly large shakeup in the meta and the tier list in just that short amount of time. And I was thinking about it. I want to know, guys, in the comments, let me know if you'd be interested in like a weekly metagame analysis video. Because I could see some weeks where that maybe, you know, there's not like too many changes, but I don't know. Right now, I'm just kind of doing it as the meta shifts. But if you want to see it every week, do let me know, and we can spend a video every week just talking about the metagame, talking about the top decks, looking at trends, all that fun stuff. I really enjoy doing these videos. Actually, a lot more than I thought I was going to when I made my first one. They're I don't know. There's something fun about just looking at all the top decks and figuring out like what's going on, what people are thinking, basically just what's going on. So. Okay, so the first thing you'll probably notice here is that we're on tournaments only mode, and yet we're not seeing a tier 1. It's usually when we're in like not tournaments only mode that we see a lack of tier 1, but they even actually readjusted the power levels here, which I wish I would have recorded this actually maybe a day sooner, because yesterday, from what I remember, they did actually have a note here talking about this. But you might remember that previously in other metagame analysis, we noted that the power level threshold for tier 1 was a power level ranking of 15. Now it has gone down to 12, and despite this, Zodiac Tri-Brigade, which was for a little bit the only tier 1 deck, has now fallen down to tier 2, and there's now, you know, quote-unquote no tier 1 deck, which is really funny because I see people in the community, like on the Discord in particular, like freaking out, like, how could there be no tier 1 deck? And it's like, well, one, this kind of has been the case for ranked ladder anyway, if you flip the mode here, but two, it's just the way that Master Duel Meta weights the various decks according to the power level, right? Again, we're not saying that like the top deck is necessarily tier 1 in this case. It's more that there's again a power level threshold the deck has to meet. The power rankings, the explanation for that can be found right down here. The long and short of it is that the Master Duel Meta kind of computes like the decks that are performing particularly well on both ladder and tournaments. Well, in tournaments in this mode, and then ladder and tournaments, I think, in this mode. It might be both. This might just be ladder. I'm not too sure actually. But long story short, the power level is a percent ranking kind of reflected of the meta. It even says, like right down here at the bottom, a deck with a power score of 5 composes 5% of the current format's total power. Not representation, the format's total power, because again, these percentages, these power levels, aren't pulled from every single deck that's being played, it's just the ones that are performing well. So yeah, basically you can just view these power rankings as percents, but again, not of decks, all decks, just of decks performing well. So we see Zodiac Tri-Brigade fall just below the threshold of tier 1. It's got a power level of 11.7 as opposed to the 12 it needs. Then we've got Drytron with 10.9, fairly close behind. Elderlich right behind that at 10.7. Elderlich actually, it's funny, right after I posted my last metagame analysis video, we saw a huge metagame shift where Elderlich started seeing a lot of play, which actually does make a fair bit of sense to me. I talked about it a little bit in the last metagame analysis video, but it tends to be that the later the season goes on, the more Elderlich decks we tend to see, and I think the reason for that is, more people as the season goes on, they want to hit Platinum or Platinum 1 or whatever, ranking goal that they have, and maybe their off-meta deck isn't doing it for them. Elderlich is a very affordable alternative to that. It was in the last special pack, so I'm pretty sure most of us have a playset of Elderlich by now. And yeah, it's just like a very accessible deck that does tend to do very well, and especially in a meta where like people do tend to concede, I think, a bit more frequently than when the game first started now, and I think that's mostly, I don't know, that could just be like just a me thing that I've noticed, but it's definitely prevalent in the Synchro event, which is currently ongoing. By the way, let me specify, it is currently the 14th, the day that I'm recording this, so I think this will go out on the 15th or 16th, one of the two, but just like last time I posted one of these videos, in 1 or 2 days this metagame could shift entirely, but if it does, I will do my best to make an updated video as soon as that happens. We see Virtual World back up kind of with these other decks. These 4 decks right here, like, it's funny because in this kind of a format, like, I think Zodiac Tri-Brigade is still by far maybe not even by far, But, like, it is definitely still the most powerful deck. It's by far the most consistent, let me say that. If you want consistent results, you know, Zoodiac Tri-Brigade I think is still the way to go. But Zoodiac Tri-Brigade, Drytron, Elderlich, Virtual World, really since Master Duel started, have kind of made up, like, some of the 4 main, like, top decks that we've seen. So it's not really surprising to see all these decks up here together. I would almost just consider, like, this tier 1 and then this tier 2. I think that would be a bit more accurate to say, like, honestly. Again, not just because of, like, you know, the fact that these are the top decks, but I think these are also accurately represented in terms of like the most powerful decks of the format as well. Down here in the next tier, we're actually seeing a couple of decks we haven't seen in a while on the list. Prank Kids, I think I might have mentioned in the last video, that will occasionally pop up on the list. It's actually doing fairly well. It's creeping up into tier 2 territory, which doesn't surprise me. I think Prank Kids is definitely a more powerful deck than people give it credit for. I think the other reason that we're seeing an increase in the power here is because we're seeing an overall increase in representation of Prank Kids. Those of you who follow the TCG might know that YCS Charlotte happened at the time of recording this last weekend, and we saw a large number of like adventure Prank Kids decks doing well. So if a deck does well in the TCG, it seems kind of natural that people would start to pick it up in Master Duel, try to learn it now, so that when the future support releases, they can be ready for it. And honestly, even, you know, future support notwithstanding, Prank Kids is generally just a fairly good deck. It's a deck I'm very interested in, and yeah, it's a deck that I think is pretty good. So we've got Adamemancipator down here at power level 7.1. Adamemancipator definitely kind of seeing a bit of a decline, not in overall gameplay, but it's like coming down from the increase it saw a bit last week when the new packs got released and Baron de Fleur came out. Obviously, Baron de Fleur being a new card, everybody wanted to try it out, and Adamemancipator is a pretty natural slot to fit in Baron de Fleur. I'm pretty sure you could play her in Virtual World too, but I don't know off the top of my head how you make her in Virtual World. So another deck we're seeing that we haven't really seen, I don't even remember the last time we've seen it on like a tier list, but it's pure Zodiac. I'm actually really interested to take a look at this, and let me know in the comments if you want to see an update to my pure Zodiac deck profile. I'm probably just about to make, well, I don't know about probably. There's a decent chance I'll make one anyway, because I'm interested to see what's going on here. I actually haven't clicked and looked at this yet, so you'll see my first reaction to like the Zodiac deck breakdown and figuring out what it's what's causing it to see a bit more play here. And then of course finally we've got pure Tri-Brigade, which we talked about a little bit last time, and we'll talk about probably only just a little bit in this video too. I can't imagine too much has changed with this deck, but okay, let's go ahead and jump into the first deck here. Okay, first deck we're going to take a look at here is Zodiac Tri-Brigade, of course. Now, we look at the extra deck, and it's interesting to me that we're actually seeing some lower numbers here. I mean, the extra deck is still mostly what I would consider solved in that, you know, even the lowest percentile is Double Dragon Lord at 89%, but I'm pretty sure this was seeing representation at, like, above 90% last time I looked at it. It was only like 91 or 92, but still above 90%. If I had to guess, this is probably because more people are using the deck. Maybe slightly more people are using the deck, and that might cause like less people to be playing Double Dragon Lords, because this is one of the more, I'll say quote unquote, optional ultra rares to craft, but I do think this card is still fairly essential to the deck. So extra doesn't look too different, you know, we're still seeing the same ratios and the same cards as well. Main deck, we're seeing an interesting trend here, and that is a decrease in Call by the Grave, which might be very confusing until we come down here and we see an increase in Crossout Designator. And this kind of, I can't help but wonder if this might be also indicative of why the overall representation of Zodiac Tri-Brigade has gone down. I do think that is the reason for its power level decreasing, is that Zodiac Tri-Brigade is seeing overall less play. Because I do still think it is, like, if you want to climb consistent and do consistently well, the best deck of the format right now. But, you know, as the format goes on, you got to figure most people who are playing Tri-Brigade Zodiac, especially at this point in Master Duel, are the people who are really using it to climb quickly. So I think that's probably why we saw a lot of this deck at the beginning of the format, and then now as we're nearing the middle of it, we're kind of seeing it fall off a bit, right? It's kind of like the same reason that Elderlich is seeing an increase. Well, it's a similar, I'll say, not the same, but a similar reason that Elderlich is seeing an increase in play, right? It's just certain players just tend to play, you know, who climb at certain times just tend to play certain decks, from what I've observed. Like, again, in early Season 4 here, when I was in the Platinum ranks, like day 1, like, oh my god, there were so many, it was like nothing but Zodiac, Tri-Brigade, and Drytron. So, and I didn't see any Elderlich at all for the first, like, 4 days of the season. I think even 5. It was almost a week, I remember. But I think that's pretty indicative to me. And again, that's just my own personal experience, and I can't really base in what the meta is all about off of my own personal experience. However, what I'm seeing reflected in the metagame tier list does confirm some of my suspicions. So, but yeah, so like I said, we're seeing an increase in play of Crossout Designator, and I think the reason that we're seeing those maybe potentially overcalled by the Graves is, you know, for the mirror match, right? Especially towards the middle of the season, as more people are catching up to the ranks where Zodiac Tri-Brigade was being played, those who are playing Zodiac Tri-Brigade themselves might be more inclined to turn to Crossout Designator, which is not only good against hand traps, of which Zodiac Tri-Brigade plays a lot, so it has a lot of stuff to hit with Crossout Designator, but, you know, seeing a lot of mirror matches, you can go ahead and take out some key cards like Revolt. Using Crossout Designator to negate a Revolt is a huge play in the mirror match. Like, it is devastating to the person whose Revolt is getting negated. So yeah, I suspect maybe people are just cutting the call buys for the Crossout Designator. If you're going to play Crossout Designator, I'd probably try to play in addition to call buy personally, but that's also maybe a bit much, which is why I don't have Crossout Designator in my Zodiac Tri-Brigade deck. I suspect this is a tech we'll see fall off as the season goes on. As less people are playing Zodiac Tri-Brigade, less people are going to then be inclined to play Crossout Designator in their Zodiac Tri-Brigade. We're seeing an increase in play of Nibiru overall as well. We are now seeing that the vast majority, maybe not vast, well, yeah, vast majority. I mean, we're looking at the percentage here. That's what, 75. Pretty much 80%, actually a little more than 80% of decks are playing some amount of Nibiru, and it looks like a decent amount of them are even playing 2 now, which is something I've been a huge proponent of, as I've said in previous videos. I think if you're going to play Max C, especially 3 of them, you should be playing a Nibiru. You should be playing a threat that punishes your opponent for going off into Max C. So, that also combined with the fact that we're seeing an increase in play, or we were rather seeing an increase of play of stuff like Drytron that was summoning multiple monsters per turn. Although now that we're seeing an increase of play Elderlich, I actually think that this might go down a bit, maybe the next time we look at the deck breakdown for Zodiac Tri-Brigade. Increase of Harpy's Feather Duster is likely in response due to more stun decks like Elderlich being seen on the ladder, although I again just think that this card is, you know, really good in general in Zodiac Tri-Brigade, so maybe other people are catching up to that. Ram, I don't know. I don't know why this is suddenly seeing a spike in play. It's probably not by that much, to be honest, but we're actually seeing less Thoroughblades than normal, and we don't see Whiptail on here at all anymore, which is kind of interesting. So okay, I think that's about all I've got to say about Zodiac Tri-Brigade. Again, extra deck's still the same. We're seeing a few interesting notes of tech choices in the main deck here, but let's go ahead and look at the next deck there. Alrighty, next deck breakdown we're going to be taking a look at here is Drytrons. Good old Drytrons. I feel like I never have too much to say about the Drytrons here, because I don't personally play the deck. I've played against it enough, so I do know how it works, but I don't know, like, the inner machinations of it, or, anything like that necessarily. So we do finally see something that I've long suspected here, and that is the representation of Herald of Perfection in the Drytron deck breakdown. Even though it's not indicated by an upward trend, I think this is by far the biggest inclusion to the deck breakdown, because we've been seeing a decrease of Herald of Ultimateness in these deck breakdowns for actually quite a while now. I think since even our metagame analysis in Season 3, like towards the end of Season 3 there. But last time, we definitely saw like a sharp decrease of play of Herald of Ultimateness. And I speculated that we were probably just seeing an increase of play of Herald of Reflection that wasn't yet reflected in the deck breakdown, and we are now seeing that confirmed here. So, between Herald of Perfection seeing play in 37% of Drytron decks, and then we have the Herald of Ultimateness seeing play in the other 62%. What do you know? That accounts for 99% of Drytron decks playing some amount of Herald. So I think I even made a comment last time like, oh, maybe more people were just playing pure Drytron now. No. No, literally, according to this breakdown, we see literally 99% of Drytron decks are playing Heralds. But I've said it before, I'll say it again. The Heralds are not the problem. And I've seen, a couple of comments being like, how is Herald not the problem? Which, makes sense to ask, right? Like, Herald's the one doing the negating. Herald's the reason that you can't play the game, right? Well, the answer to that is actually no, it's not. The reason that you can't play the game isn't because of Herald in and of itself. It's more that Herald has consistently has the fuel to negate anything you could do on your turn. Herald of Perfection has been around a long time, since Force of the Breaker, which was like, what, 2010? And Herald of Ultimateness, I think, was not that far behind in like 2014 or so. These cards existed for a long time without being issues. Herald of Perfection, like 2011, I think, was a tier 2, kind of bordering on tier 1 deck. But from what I remember anyway, we didn't really ever see these cards ever come up again as a tier 1 deck. And that's because, you know, in order to really get the full value out of the Herald, you, one, have to have it on the board, which it's a ritual monster, so you're already having to jump through hoops in order to even summon it. And two, you, in addition to that, already have to have a ton of fairies in hand, or have access to a ton of fairies in hand. And typically, in most scenarios, the resources you invest in ritual summoning the monster are going to sharply take away from the resources you would have to then negate stuff. So that's kind of been like the caveat, the catch-22 of Herald for a long time. The problem is Ben 10 and Eva. Ben 10 being able to, one, make the deck very, very consistent, because rituals by default are not consistent. You need to have the ritual spell and the ritual monster. Ben 10 solves this by being able to add, well, she can add any light fairy, which is really part of the problem. One, she can add herself, which is ridiculous. Two, she can add the Eva to fuel more stuff, or the Diviner to start your Herald, which makes her Herald even, or to search your ritual pieces, which makes her Herald even more consistent. And then, of course, Ben 10 can search the Herald itself if needed. Eva being the main problem, Eva being rather another main problem, in that she just makes the deck too consistent. And honestly, the condition is a bit ridiculous. Like, she activates if she's sent to the graveyard for any reason, whether she's like milled by Beatrice or discarded by Herald, she'll instantly load your hand with more fairies. Even loading a Herald of Perfection plus Diviner, which guarantees not only a monster effect negation and destruction as a quick effect, but also the potential to go into another play if you still have the Diviner around next turn. Eva just, Eva would be totally fine. Like, here's the thing. Eva would be fine if she said, if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard. Or, like, I don't know. I don't want to say if this card is tributed. That might still be a bit much for this deck in particular. But, and similarly, Ben 10. Like, I think Ben 10 would even be fine to add herself if her restriction was she can only add a light ritual fairy monster. Or, hell, even a ritual fairy monster at that point. It doesn't even have to necessarily be light. Yeah, then I don't think we'd see nearly as many issues with, no, not with Herald, with Eva and with Ben 10 there. So that's, again, why I think these are definitely the problem cards. The Heralds inherently are difficult to actually pull off. It's the Ben 10s making them very consistent to summon, and the Evas making them very consistent to have the resources in hand to negate a bunch of stuff, mitigating the two factors of the Heralds that inherently balance them. So I ended up going into that tangent there a bit unintentionally, but that's alright. It's something I've actually been meaning to talk about for a while, but I didn't want to dedicate its own video to, so. Okay, we've talked long enough about Drytrons here, I think. Let's go and look at the next deck. Alright, so the next deck we're going to be seeing here is Elderlich. I actually don't really have a whole lot to say about this deck because there aren't a whole lot of trend changes. However, these trend changes, I think, are further evidence for my theory that words. I think the trends that we are seeing here are evidence for my theory that we're seeing Elderlich seeing more play because it is being used by more players to climb now. I see a lot of people kind of make the mistake that they're thinking that these shifts in the metagame are indicative of the deck's inherent power levels. And it's not. Like, a deck slot on a tier list is not representative of its inherent power level all the time. It is usually, generally speaking, but we do also have to take into consider that player trends are going to affect this tier list as it is being updated in real time based on what people are using in tournaments and on the ladder. Particularly in these breakdowns, you know, they're not even default tournament only mode. So this is like, we know this is ranked ladder this is representative of the ranked ladder. And we're only seeing a few downward trends here, but again, like I said, I think these support my theory, particularly the downward trend of Zeus and Vanity's Emptiness, right? Because players who are turning to this deck, who are using it as a side option to climb, so then they can use their fun decks afterward, so to speak, are less likely to invest more ultra rares into actually like building a full Elderlich deck. And of the ultra rares that you would put in an Elderlich deck, we definitely know that Zeus and Vanity's Emptiness are a few of the more quote-unquote optional ones. Obviously, Vanity's Emptiness is optimal to run in the deck, but you can definitely get by, and you could definitely get to Plat 1 without even using it, so... like I said, that's really the only trends. I mean, the only other downward trend we're seeing is Torrential Tribute, which is interesting because we were seeing this as an upward trend last time, and I still think Torrential is really, really good in Elderlich, and it's a little weird to me that you don't see it in more Elderlich decks, but I don't know. Maybe there's another reason. I'm not an Elderlich player. I'm not like an Elderlich main or anything, so maybe there's another reason I'm just not aware of. Maybe it's just not as good in this format. I don't know. I think Torrential is still just a good card, but... yeah, very short section here. Like I said, just a few changes that more or less confirmed what I've already talked about. So let's look at the next deck. All right, next deck we're going to be taking a look at here is Virtual World. And we're seeing mostly our trend changes in the extra deck. And notably, we're seeing downward trends in the Phantom Knight Breaksword and like Gaia Dragon kind of engine. And we're seeing an upward trend in Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon and Ultimaya Zulkin again. We're also seeing, I think, a huge spike in Coral Dragon. Like, this is at 91%. Was this card? I'm trying to remember. I don't even think I remember seeing this on the last deck breakdown at all. And now we're seeing it in 91. I could be wrong about that, of course, but... and now we're seeing it in 91% of Virtual World decks. But I've definitely been seeing more Coral Dragons from Virtual World on the ladder in my playing. I've noticed that as well. This card, obviously great for being a versatile tuner option to go into... you know, of course, the Ultimaya Zulkin, which I guess it doesn't make sense if the Coral Dragon is seeing an increase in play. It's probably because the Ultimaya Zulkin is seeing an increase in play. Although we're still seeing, you know, 40% of decks that are using Coral Dragon but not Ultimaya Zulkin. Even though Coral Dragon is a targeted destruction that costs a discard, which normally is like the kind of one of the worst forms of removal there. Just the fact that it's attached to a synchro body is still good enough. Plus, you know, when Coral Dragon is used as a synchro material, or rather when it's sent from the field to the graveyard for any reason, you get to draw a card. So that kind of mitigates the discard cost there as well. And yeah, I don't know enough about Virtual World myself to know, you know, the difference between like this engine versus this engine, except obviously this engine lets you put out a Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, which does seem more powerful to me than... honestly, I'm not even sure what Gaia Dragon... is Gaia Dragon just supposed to be another material for like Zeus or something? Or like maybe VFD? Well, no, like, that wouldn't really make any sense, would it? I don't know. I'm guessing it's just a Zeus material. Maybe it has something to do with... like the Gossip Chat. I don't know. Again, I just don't know enough about this deck to really talk in length about like what these reflections mean. Except again, I am pretty confident that Coral Dragon, a lot of if its increase in play is probably due to Ultimaya Zulkin becoming more popular again. Yeah, seeing more decks having increased play of Nibiru. That's again kind of what I was figuring with the last metagame analysis, where Nibiru I thought was pretty underrated. It's now seeming rather that other people are seeing the power of Nibiru as well. Okay, yep, that's all I got to say about Virtual World here. Let's look at the next one. Okay, so next deck here is one we actually have not covered on a metagame breakdown or a metagame analysis video, and that is Prank Kids. I've personally only run into Prank Kids a couple of times on ladder, which honestly really baffles me because, like I said in the when we were looking at the actual tier list itself, I do think this deck is fairly good, honestly. It's obviously showing some, you know, play again in the TCG with the DPE and Brave engine, the Adventure engine. But even again here on Master Duel, I think that this card, I think this is an example of a deck where its power level is, maybe it isn't now, but definitely up to this point, its power level was not accurately reflected by the tier list. And again, I think that's another example of, it's not that the deck got more powerful all of a sudden, because we haven't had, you know, any, you know, the set change didn't affect it at all, and we haven't had any huge shakeups in the meta really with the last set change. We haven't had a ban list, so it really is just that more people are trying Prank Kids now, and they're probably now realizing that, oh, even in Master Duel where this deck isn't, you know, quote unquote complete as compared to the TCG, this deck is still really, really good. Interesting that we're seeing an increase of play in Crossout Designator. I guess I don't have anything to compare it to, but I wonder if that is indicative of this deck also seeing more play. I do know that Crossout Designator is also just generally really, really good in Prank Kids, because this deck is really, really combo reliant. And like combo reliant decks, it's really hurt by Maxi, it's really hurt by Nibiru, but this deck is also very, very hurt by Ash, because all your combo pieces, your prank kids, you know, they all summon from the deck, so Ash can negate any one of them. You know, Ash, most decks you have to find the choke point, but in this deck, like, every point of play just about is the choke point where you can Ash and stop them. So I would imagine that's why Crossout Designator sees more play in this deck than you would see in other combo decks. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I don't I haven't played against Prank Kids too much. It is, again, a deck I'm interested in, but I can't speak a whole lot about it at this time. So we'll definitely be keeping my eye on it, not only personally, but also as part of the meta as well, to see if maybe its power level will level out here, which I think, again, where the deck is at right now is fairly indicative of its power level, reflective to the rest of the meta. So we'll see if it stays here, or maybe if it just starts to get less popular again. Time will tell. But yeah, let's look at the next deck here. I think we've got 3 more left. Alright, so we've got Adamemancipator here for the next deck that we're going to take a look at. Interesting trend of the extra deck here. This is a change that I actually definitely just straight up made myself, and that was to take out the Herald of the Arclight and include the Baron de Fleur. Yeah, Herald of the Arclight is just a little bit too awkward to make most of the time. If you're playing Weeping Idol, which is actually now represented here as an option in the deck, it's seen play in 25% of decks, so a fair amount of people are playing Weeping Idol. Weeping Idol does make Herald of the Arclight definitely easier to make, and Herald of the Arclight is also definitely a good card. One important thing to note about Herald of the Arclight, which people have pointed out to me in the comments that didn't really occur to me, even though I have seen it happen in game. But a good reason to keep this card is that it makes your board less susceptible to droplet if you're able to end with a Herald of the Arclight as well, because Herald of the Arclight is going to banish anything that is sent from the hand or main deck to the graveyard, and as part of its condition, in order to be able to activate, you have to send cards from the hand to the graveyard with Forbidden Droplet. So while Herald of the Arclight is out, they just can't activate Forbidden Droplet at all. I'm pretty sure they just can't activate it at all. But on top of that, it's also got an Omni Negate, which is, again, very good to end on, and generally speaking, being able to banish anything sent from the hand or main deck to the graveyard is going to hamper a lot of deck strategies. So even though Herald of the Arclight is seeing a downward trend in play, that doesn't necessarily mean it's now bad in the deck and you should just take it out. It's, again, going to mostly depend on your build, and I think it's going to, again, a lot depend on whether or not you are playing Weeping Idol. But yeah, I think that, like I said, I took Herald out of my build because I don't personally plan to play Weeping Idol this time. But I definitely don't think it's a bad option. Of course, we're seeing a large increase of play of Baron de Fleur, up from like 35%, I think it was, 30-something% last week, now up to 66%. I suspect we will see this level out somewhere closer to like 80 or 90-some%. It's just, again, as more people are crafting their barons or pulling them, it's now been a little over a week since the Ruler's Mask and the new Synchro set came out, so more and more people are getting their hands on Baron and putting them into their Adamemancipator decks. Even though it's not noted, again, by a downward arrow, we're still seeing a downward trend of play of Sekka's Light, down to 28%, and as 3 of anyway, as opposed to, like, when I first built this deck, it was at, like, I think it was right under 50%. I think it was at 49. And then the last time we looked, it was like 33, I think. So, just a slow drop in Sekka's Light builds, which I think people are just realizing, that Called by the Grave is just far too important not to include in this deck. Just because we're so susceptible to Max C, and we gotta have it out to it. Crossout Designator being a good out not only to Max C, but Nibiru as well. Once again, I would play this personally in addition to Called By, if you're going to play it rather as instead of Called By, especially in a deck like this where, in Tri-Brigade Zodiac, again, it made a little more sense to see people playing Crossout Designator instead of Called By, because the deck was so popular early in the meta, right, early in the season, right, that it's basically Called By that can also hit Revolt if you're playing it, the mirror match. Adamemancipator, there's definitely far fewer mirror matches of that running around on a ranked ladder, so thus you would want to include Crossout Designator to stop hand traps, so you would want to in addition to Called By. Other than that, not seeing too many significant trends. I mean, we're seeing a downward trend in Dragite, which I think the only reason we're seeing this on here in the first place is because I think this might include games from the Synchro Festival where Dragite is, like, definitely much more needed because you can't really use like the Prank Kids engine at all. So maybe we're seeing a downward trend, or maybe we're seeing this here in the first place because of that event, and now we're seeing a downward trend as people are very quickly, taking their gems and running with the event, basically. I did kind of want to talk a little bit about Miracle Rupture. I've seen some people ask if I like Miracle Rupture or if I would play it in this deck. I personally wouldn't, honestly. Personally, I don't think it's bad, but in my builds, I'm not really keen to add it. Miracle Rupture is mainly there to just send Revival Golem and Tackle Crusader. I do play Tackle Crusader, but I'm not a huge fan of Revival Golem. And in any case, I would want to play a Foolish Burial before I played any amount of Miracle Ruptures. And I think one Foolish Burial, like one of these effects, is probably just about all you need. A Revival Golem, even though it does see play in a significant amount of decks, I'm really just not that big of a fan of it. I can't lie to you guys, I'm really not. It is an extender, but it's still just like a very narrow extender because you have to have Foolish, or if you're playing it Miracle Rupture, in order to use it as an extender. And it's not really that great of a card to draw either, to be honest. So I'm just not sold on it. Can't lie to you guys. I'm not sold on the Foolish Miracle Rupture for Revival Golem, that line. Again, I am playing Tackle Crusader as a tech option, and I do like that. But, yep. Just looking at the rest of the list here, I don't see anything really else of note that we haven't seen already. Okay, let's look at the next deck. Okay, so I was rather interested to see this one because I have played pure Zodiac in the past, not since like Season 2, I think, not since the Xyz Festival. Wow, it's been longer than I thought since I've actually played this deck. It's interesting. I wondered if I was going to glean anything from the breakdown, and I really don't. I don't see a whole lot I didn't already know about the deck. It's interesting that we're seeing the F-Zero engine only used in 67% of Zodiac decks. That's actually very surprising to me. I would consider that core to the extra deck. So the fact that only 2/3 of Zodiac decks out there are playing it is just kind of baffling to me. The rest of the extra deck makes a lot of sense. I mean, so does the main deck too, right? Droplet as a 3 of in the deck, I thought was always kind of like you max out on droplets in this deck all the time, but apparently it's only, oops, sorry about that. Apparently it's only just now seeing an upward trend, an upward increase in gameplay. So, and it's really not even seeing play in that many. Well, I guess 40% is like decent, but still, I would have thought it was be more than that because again, this card is just, I think, really, really good in this deck. Interesting that this deck is one of the only ones, I think actually the only one on the current tier list, and probably one of the very few deck breakdowns overall where we actually see Ghost Spell and Haunted Mansion. This is definitely a very niche hand trap, but it's actually not that bad of one. It's fairly comparable to Skullmeister. I mean, really, it's comparable to Ash. It's Ash, but for the graveyard instead of the deck, which is obviously less useful than Ash overall, but still, definitely does have its merits. I think a lot of what keeps people from trying this card more is the fact that it's an ultra rare, and so obviously you have to go way out of your way to craft it. And again, it's a bit more of a meta-dependent tech, right? Or like a meta-dependent hand trap. And really the reason it's seeing play in pure Zodiac is because this deck doesn't, take up a whole lot of main deck space for its engine, so it can afford to play a lot, and I mean a lot of different disruption options. So I think that's why we're seeing Ghost Spell and Haunted Mansion here, but not in other decks. I don't think it's necessarily indicative of the fact that Ghost Spell and Haunted Mansion is really, really good in this meta. I think it's just more representative of the fact that, this deck, Zodiac, pure Zodiac, can very easily slot a more quote-unquote narrow card like this. So, I was looking forward to this, but this really hasn't told me anything. It's not that it hasn't told me anything. It hasn't told me as much as I was hoping it would. I'm curious to see what you guys think of the downward trend of the F-Zeros in this deck, because that is honestly fairly baffling to me. But I think we just have one more deck to look at. It's going to be pure Tri-Brigade. Let's take a look at that real quick. Alright, so wow, this is actually a bit more interesting than I thought it would be, particularly this figure right here, that we're seeing a very significant downward trend of Rescue Cat in pure Tri-Brigade decks. Wasn't this at I think this was at, it was definitely at above 50% last time we looked, but I thought it was like around 60-some%. So that's really interesting to me to see that significantly less Rescue Cats. I mean, maybe more people just playing 2 as opposed to 3, but still. But honestly, that does kind of reflect on what I think about Rescue Cat in pure Tri-Brigade. I mean, yeah, it seems like a good option to get out, like, you know, you get out a Karos and a Kit, you get out 2 Tri-Brigade monsters, you can instantly go into plays, but like, Rescue Cat takes up your normal summon. It's very easy to get stopped by hand traps. You're going to be hit by Ash. Your opponent can chain Max C. It makes you a lot more susceptible to Nibiru. It can get Gammaed, which you know, is overall seeing an increase in play of the meta. Cypher and Gear Gamma, but definitely in this deck as well. But yeah, I don't know. Rescue Cat is just so susceptible to hand traps, and it eats your normal summon. Those are the 2 main reasons I really just don't like this card. And with this card seeing a downward trend in play, you know, I gotta kind of ask the question, like, if you're not playing Rescue Cat, why aren't you playing Tri-Zoo, you know, like, or some Tri-Brigade variant? Like, I don't think pure Tri-Brigade is a bad deck by any stretch of the imagination. It's still, I think, a fairly good deck, but it's very easy to make the deck, you know, better, like, very, very easy to, so... I think a lot of the trends, honestly, especially for extra deck stuff like Racevulgar and Appaloosa, might be more indicative of the fact that we're just not seeing as many pure Tri-Brigade decks as other decks. So, like, the fewer of a deck you see in the meta, the more influence the slight variances are going to have in the overall breakdown. So, I suspect that's probably why we're seeing, like, so many, like, radical different arrows here. And maybe that is just the reason we're seeing a downward trend in Rescue Cat, is maybe somebody's taking Rescue Cat to tournaments or up in ladder, or taking Tri-Brigade to Rescue Cat up, and taking Rescue Cat to tournaments and ladder. Jesus, I cannot say the sentence right. They're playing Tri-Brigades without Zodiacs. That's what I'm getting at. Oh my god. I'm not even going to try. Clearly that sentence was just never meant to come out right. I'm sure you get what I mean. Maybe you don't. You probably don't. Alright, well, I think that's a pretty good sign that we should maybe just close out the video here. Let's take one last look at the tier list and we will go to the outro. Alright, everybody, thank you as always for watching. Oh, I just realized we never really looked at we never turned off tournaments only mode earlier, which I didn't mean to do, but interestingly, this mode we're seeing Zodiac Tri-Brigade like see a rapid decrease in play. We're seeing a lot more Adamancipators than Drytrons or Zodiac Tri-Brigade. We still got Sky Striker up there as well. I again think this is just more indicative of more people playing Adamancipator. Like for the Synchro event, I suspect the Synchro event is influencing the weight of Adamancipator here. So, and it could, I guess, well, no, not in tournaments only mode, affects the increase of Virtual World as well here. But yeah, I guess I figured I'd just go over that very briefly. But again, as always, even though this mode is only for tournaments, it's still, I think, representative enough of what the ladder looks like, and more importantly, of Deck's power levels relative to the ladder, that I still think it's a decent metric to use, you know, as long as you remember certain things about it. But yeah, wow, I think that's going to do it for this video. Holy cow, I definitely did not mean to go quite as long as I did. I thought it was going to be like maybe 25 minutes, but now we're coming up on 40, looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. This is XLex. And I hope you have a fantastic day.